If you think blood is thicker than water, you've never seen what a $50 million inheritance does to a marriage. 1 week ago, my husband Leo looked me dead in the eye, packed my bags, and told me I was nothing but a placeholder until he got his hands on his grandfather's fortune. He literally threw me out of our own house into a torrential downpour, laughing as my clothes hit the muddy driveway. He thought he won. He thought he was untouchable. But exactly 7 days later, I woke up to 42 missed calls, a dozen frantic text messages, and Leo sobbing on my doorstep, begging me to save him from the absolute nightmare his life had just become. What he didn't realize when he kicked me to the curb was that his grandfather's will had a hidden, airtight clause, and I was the only person on earth who held the key to every single cent. Before we dive into the rest of the story, I have to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop your country or state in the comments below, and make sure to hit that subscribe button right now because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely need to hear. My name is Clara, and for 7 long, grueling, yet seemingly beautiful years, I was the absolute definition of a perfect wife. To truly understand how I ended up standing on a slick, oil-stained driveway, watching my husband of nearly a decade smirk at me from our dry, warmly lit front porch, you have to understand exactly who Leo was before the concept of money completely rotted his soul. When I first met Leo back in the late 2000s, he wasn't wearing tailored Italian wool or sporting a luxury timepiece that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. He was a struggling architectural draftsman, drowning in student loan debt and fighting tooth and nail for every scrap of freelance work he could find. He had brilliant, sweeping ideas for modern, sustainable structures, but he possessed absolutely zero confidence to pitch them to the high-end firms in downtown Chicago. He was working out of a cramped, drafty, 4th-floor walk-up studio apartment in a gritty corner of the city. The place permanently smelled of stale dark roast coffee, cheap graphite pencils, and wet wool from a leaky radiator that hissed like an angry snake all through the brutal Midwestern winters. I wasn't looking for a millionaire, a trust fund baby, or a man who could buy my affection with designer labels. I was looking for a partner, a real, grounded, authentic human being who wanted to build a life from the bedrock up. At the time, I was working 60 hours a week as a junior forensic accountant at a mid-sized boutique firm in the city. My job, by its very nature, trained me to look past the beautiful facades people present to the world. I was paid to look past the charming smiles, the firm handshakes, and the emotional appeals, and focus entirely on what the cold, hard numbers revealed in the dark. In my line of work, figures don't lie, even when the people typing them into spreadsheets do. We fell in love with a fierce, intoxicating velocity. Within a year of our first date at a Greasy Spoon diner, we were married in a remarkably simple, no-frills courthouse ceremony. There were no lavish floral arrangements, no bridesmaids in matching silk dresses, and absolutely no expensive catering. My wedding dress was a simple cream-colored sundress I bought on clearance, and our reception consisted of ordering 2 large pepperoni pizzas. Sitting cross-legged on a second-hand fabric sofa, we dragged up those 4 flights of stairs together, and toast-clicking cheap champagne flutes we bought at a dollar store. That night, Leo looked into my eyes with a raw, vulnerable sincerity that I would have sworn under oath was real. He pressed his forehead against mine and promised that we were a team, a single unit, and that we would build an incredible life together out of absolutely nothing. And for a long time, we did exactly that. For the first 5 years of our marriage, our relationship was a masterclass in mutual respect, late-night grocery runs to catch the clearance meats, shared dreams, and budgeting down to the very last fraction of a penny. We had a joint checking account that rarely saw a balance higher than 3 digits after the monthly bills were paid, but we didn't care. We were happy. When Leo came home one evening, trembling with anxiety and admitting that he wanted to quit his dead-end draftsman job to launch his own boutique architectural design firm, I didn't hesitate for a single second. I didn't tell him it was too risky. Instead, I pulled double shifts at my firm, took on freelance tax auditing work on the weekends, and single-handedly carried the financial weight of our household to pay our rent and buy his expensive blueprints and software licenses. I was the one who managed his chaotic, disorganized corporate books during my midnight hours. I filed his corporate taxes, structured his LLC, and carefully calculated our grocery budget so he could afford to take potential clients out to nice lunches. I made sure his business stayed afloat when wealthy clients delayed their payments for months on end, using my own hard-earned savings to bridge the gap so his business credit score wouldn't plummet. I never threw it in his face, not once. I didn't view it as a sacrifice, I viewed it as an investment in our collective future. I loved him completely, and I believed in his talent with every fiber of my being. I genuinely thought we were an unbreakable team, two soldiers fighting in the trenches of life together. The only dark, looming shadow over our entire marriage was Leo's estranged grandfather, Arthur Vance. Arthur was an old-school, iron-fisted tycoon who had amassed a staggering, legendary fortune in commercial real estate across the entire Midwest. He was a notoriously cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless patriarch who treated his family like employees and his employees like dirt. He had a reputation in the Chicago business world for cutting off his own children the exact moment they showed any sign of independent thought or resisted his tyrannical control. Leo's own father had walked away from the family empire decades ago, choosing to live a modest, quiet life as a high school history teacher rather than endure another second of Arthur's emotional abuse and psychological manipulation. Because of that choice, Arthur Vance had completely ignored Leo's existence for the vast majority of his life. Leo grew up with a deep-seated, simmering resentment toward the old man. Over late-night dinners in our cramped apartment, Leo would often recount bitter stories of how his grandfather's insatiable greed had fractured their entire extended family, leaving a trail of broken relationships, divorces, and estranged siblings in its wake. "He's a monster, Clara," Leo would tell me, his jaw tightening as he stared at an article featuring Arthur in the Chicago Business Journal. "The man thinks money can buy people's souls. He thinks because he has tens of millions of dollars, he owns the people around him. I want absolutely nothing to do with him, his empire, or his toxic blood money. We're going to make our own way without his shadow hanging over us." I believed him implicitly. I looked at his earnest expression and truly believed that Leo possessed a rock-solid moral compass that could never, under any circumstances, be bought, leased, or corrupted by a pile of cash. Then, reality fractured. A little over 2 years ago, Arthur Vance's seemingly invincible health began to rapidly, violently decline. He suffered a series of major, debilitating strokes that left him partially paralyzed and confined to his sprawling, intensely isolated historic estate in the ultra-wealthy northern suburbs of Chicago. With no other living heirs who hadn't already been officially disowned, passed away, or driven out of the country by his malice, Arthur did something that shocked the entire extended family network. He reached out to Leo. At first, Leo played the part of the reluctant, principled grandson perfectly. He tossed the typed letter from Arthur's legal team onto our kitchen counter, scoffing and telling me he had no interest in playing the dying billionaire's twisted, manipulative games. But as the days went on, I could see the curiosity and the unresolved childhood longing eating away at him. I, being the supportive, empathetic wife who wanted nothing more than to see her husband heal his deep-seated family wounds, made the ultimate mistake. I encouraged him to go see the old man. I didn't do it for the money. Heaven knows I didn't care about the Vance fortune. We were finally making a decent living, my career was thriving, and Leo's firm was finally turning a modest profit. I encouraged him because I thought it would bring him emotional closure. I thought it would allow him to look the monster in the eye and finally find peace with his family history. "Go see him, Leo," I remember saying so clearly one rainy Tuesday evening, running my fingers through his hair as he sat stressed, staring blankly at his laptop at our kitchen island. "Even if he's difficult, even if he's the same old cynical man, at least you won't have any haunting regrets when he finally passes away. Go there as an independent man who doesn't need his money and just hear what he has to say." That conversation was, without a shadow of a doubt, the single biggest mistake of my entire life. Leo scheduled his first visit to the massive Vance estate that weekend. When he came back home that Sunday evening, he was unusually quiet, his eyes wide and unfocused, as if he had just seen a vision of an entirely different dimension. He told me the estate was incredible. Acres of manicured lawns, private security gates, original oil paintings hanging on oak-paneled walls, and a staff of silent servants catering to a dying man's every whim. He said Arthur was frail, breathing through an oxygen mask, but that his mind was still as sharp and lethal as a razor blade. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the weekly visits began to morph into something else entirely. One visit a week turned into 2. Within 6 months, Leo was spending practically every single weekend at the mansion, leaving me alone in our newly purchased suburban home, a home we had just bought using a very heavy chunk of my own personal savings alongside his business's first real profits. And with every weekend that passed at the Vance estate, a tiny piece of the husband I loved broke off and evaporated, replaced by a cold, arrogant, and unfamiliar stranger. The man who used to be deeply grateful for a simple, home-cooked pasta dinner started making passive-aggressive comments about the quality of our groceries, complaining that our suburban house felt too small, too stifling, and utterly beneath a man of his talents. The man who used to gladly split the household chores and scrub the toilets alongside me began treating me like an unpaid personal assistant, leaving his dirty clothes on the floor and barking orders about his dry cleaning. He traded his sensible, fuel-efficient sedan for a sleek, roaring luxury sports car, casually claiming it was an absolute necessity to maintain an appropriate corporate appearance for the high-end commercial clients he was suddenly trying to attract. He began wearing bespoke, tailored suits bought with a generous monthly management allowance his grandfather had started funneling into his accounts. The humble, hardworking, passionate young architect I had married was completely vanishing before my very eyes. In his place stood a vanity-driven, entitled stranger who looked at the world, at our life, and worst of all, at me, with a rapidly growing sense of icy condescension. The setup was complete, the trap was laid, and I was completely blind to the fact that my 7 years of unyielding loyalty were about to be treated like absolute garbage. The shift in Leo's personality wasn't an overnight explosion. It was a slow, toxic leak that systematically poisoned every single corner of our marriage. It was like watching a disease slowly take over a healthy body, cell by cell, until the original person was completely unrecognizable. By the start of this year, Arthur Vance's condition had downgraded from stable to critical. The doctors made it clear that the old man was on his final lap, and he was placed on full-time hospice care inside the master suite of his sprawling, isolated estate. With the end clearly in sight, Leo practically moved into the mansion permanently. He abandoned our life, leaving me entirely alone in our newly purchased suburban home. I was left to wander through the quiet rooms of a house that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of our shared hard work, but instead felt like a gilded cage where I was being intentionally forgotten. Whenever I offered to pack a bag and come with him to the estate to help share the burden of watching a dying relative, Leo would instantly snap at me, his face twisting into a mask of pure annoyance, or he would smoothly construct an elaborate wall of excuses to keep me as far away from that property as humanly possible. "Grandpa is an incredibly old-fashioned, rigid man, Clara," Leo would say, his tone dripping with a smooth, patronizing impatience as he adjusted the links on his new designer watch. "He's in a highly volatile, fragile state of mind right now. He absolutely detests seeing unfamiliar faces in his corridors, and frankly, he wants to focus every single ounce of his remaining energy on passing the family legacy down to me. It's a delicate biological and legal process. It's just better for everyone involved if you stay back here, keep your head down, and handle the house." Unfamiliar faces. A stranger. That word cut through me like a serrated knife. I had been his wife for 7 long years. I had been the one wiping grease off his forehead when he was too tired to stand. I had supported him when his bank account possessed less than $50. Yet suddenly, the moment a multi-million-dollar inheritance entered the equation, I was deemed an outsider, a literal stranger to his family legacy. I tried desperately to be understanding. I spent hours lying awake in our empty bed, staring at the ceiling, gaslighting my own instincts. I told myself that dealing with a dying billionaire patriarch, navigating complex family dynamics, and preparing to carry a massive real estate legacy was an unimaginable amount of psychological stress. I told myself that Leo was just overwhelmed, that his lashing out was merely a symptom of exhaustion. But my professional training as a forensic accountant makes it physically and mentally impossible for me to ignore red flags for long. My brain is quite literally wired to notice subtle anomalies, breaking patterns, behavioral discrepancies, and structural cracks. If a number doesn't balance, there is a reason for it. And right now, Leo was a walking, talking discrepancy. His behavior didn't add up, no matter how much emotional grease I applied to the ledger. First, there was the sudden, drastic change in his digital habits. For the entirety of our relationship, Leo had been an open book with his devices. We knew each other's passcodes, frequently using whichever phone was physically closer to order food, look up directions, or control the music playlist in the car. There were zero secrets between us because there was nothing to hide. But around the beginning of March, I noticed he had changed his alphanumeric passcode without saying a single word to me. Furthermore, the phone never left his person. If he went to the bathroom to brush his teeth, the phone went with him. If he walked to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, it was tucked tightly into his pocket. Whenever a notification pinged on the screen while the phone happened to be lying face up on the counter, he would literally snatch it out of the air like a guilty, panicked teenager hiding a bad report card. The definitive crack in his facade appeared on a chilly Thursday evening. Leo had briefly come back to our house to pack a fresh set of tailored suits for his weekend stay at the estate. He had left his phone on the nightstand while he went into the master bathroom to take a shower. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, folding laundry, trying to drown out the voice in my head telling me that my marriage was crumbling. Suddenly, the phone screen lit up. A bright, persistent banner illuminated the darkened room. I didn't want to spy. I hated the idea of invading his privacy. But the screen stayed illuminated for a long time, receiving multiple consecutive messages. I glanced over and my breath caught in my throat. The sender wasn't his grandfather, and it wasn't a corporate bank representative. It was a contact saved simply and cryptically as VE. The message on the lock screen read, "The lawyers say everything is completely on track for the final signing. Just hang in there a little longer, babe. Our new life is almost here." My heart physically stopped beating for a second. The blood in my veins turned to absolute ice. Babe? A legal consultant or a business associate does not call a married client babe. A financial advisor does not talk about our new life being almost here. When the bathroom door finally opened and Leo stepped out into the bedroom, a cloud of warm steam rising from his shoulders, I didn't yell. I didn't throw a tantrum or let my emotions dictate my posture. I forced my breathing to slow down, channeling the cold, analytical objectivity I use when I sit across from a corporate executive suspected of embezzling millions. I kept my voice completely level, calm, and direct. "Leo, who exactly is VE?" I asked, pointing a steady finger toward the still glowing device on the nightstand. His face went completely, utterly pale for a fraction of a second, a telltale sign of a classic guilt response. But within a blink, his eyes hardened, and he instantly shifted into a defensive posture of pure, aggressive annoyance. "Are you seriously spying on my personal phone now, Clara? Jesus Christ, you are becoming so incredibly paranoid and insecure lately. It's getting exhausting to come home to." "I asked you a direct, simple question, Leo," I replied, refusing to let him deflect the momentum of the conversation. "A contact saved under the initials VE just texted your phone. They called you babe and explicitly talked about a new life that the two of you are waiting for. What exactly is going on?" Leo scoffed, tossing his towel onto the floor and letting out a harsh, mocking laugh that felt like a slap in the face. "If you must know, Miss Detective, it's Victoria Evans. She's Arthur's senior estate attorney from the high-rise firm downtown. She's an eccentric, wealthy, older Southern woman who calls literally everyone babe or honey. It's just her personality, Clara. And the new life she's referring to is the massive, complex restructuring of the entire Vance corporate estate once Grandpa finally passes away. I am under an astronomical amount of pressure trying to secure my family's future, doing everything manually, and I come home to my wife cross-examining me like a common criminal over a harmless business text." He snatched his phone off the nightstand, grabbed his leather duffel bag, and stormed out of the master bedroom, slamming the heavy wooden door behind him so hard the picture frames on the wall rattled. I sat completely still on the edge of the mattress, the silence of the empty house washing over me. His explanation made logical, sequential sense on the surface. Victoria Evans was a real person. I knew her name from the legal letterheads Leo had brought home months ago. She was indeed a prominent estate lawyer in the city, but my gut, that primal, ancient instinct that protects people from danger, was screaming that something was deeply, fundamentally rotten. I highly doubted that a high-powered, Ivy League-educated attorney who charged $1,000 an hour would risk her pristine professional reputation by sending highly unprofessional, cryptic texts to a client's personal cell phone at 9 o'clock at night. Over the next 3 weeks, the psychological distance between Leo and me grew from a crack into an uncrossable canyon. When he did come home for brief, tense periods, he stopped sleeping in our shared bed entirely. He claimed that his late-night international conference calls regarding the estate's foreign assets were disrupting my sleep schedule, preferring to sleep in the downstairs guest room with the door locked from the inside. He stopped eating dinner with me, opting to eat at high-end restaurants downtown before coming home late. Whenever we did speak in the hallways, his tone was laced with a strange, condescending pity. He would look around our house, a beautiful, well-maintained home that I had poured my heart into decorating, with open disgust. He would look at my practical, sensible wardrobe, my lack of designer labels, and my modest vehicle with a sneer of superiority. He was already mentally living in his future reality as a billionaire mogul, and I was being treated like nothing more than an annoying, inconvenient ghost from his poverty-stricken past that he couldn't wait to exorcise from his life. The absolute breaking point of this agonizing waiting game arrived on a bleak, suffocating Tuesday afternoon in early May. I was sitting at my desk at the firm, staring at a complex data sheet when my phone slid across the polished wood, vibrating violently with Leo's name flashing on the screen. When I pressed the phone to my ear, expecting the usual clipped, impatient tone, I was met with something entirely different. There was absolutely zero sadness in his voice, no grief, no reverence, no quiet mourning for the passing of his last living paternal relative. Instead, Leo sounded completely breathless, hyperactive, and utterly ecstatic, his voice vibrating with an eerie, manic energy. "It's finally done, Clara," he whispered into the line, his voice trembling so hard I could hear the micro-tremors in his breathing. "The old man is gone. He passed away about an hour ago. The formal reading of the will is officially scheduled for next Friday morning at the downtown legal headquarters. It's finally happening. Everything we ever talked about, everything I endured, it's real. I'm so incredibly sorry for your loss, Leo," I said softly, leaning back in my office chair, genuinely trying to hold space for the complicated, lonely, and tragic life his grandfather had lived in that isolated fortress. "Even if things were complicated, he was still your grandfather. Are you doing okay?" "Oh, don't start with the fake sympathy, Clara," Leo snapped, his manic tone instantly hardening into a sharp defensive edge. "This isn't a time to be sorry. This is a massive celebration. The king is dead, and the crown is mine. I'll be staying full-time at the estate for the next week to coordinate the logistics, secure the properties, and handle the transition details directly with Victoria's team. Do not call my phone unless the suburban house is physically burning to the ground. I need absolute, uninterrupted focus right now. The stakes are too high." The line went dead before I could even construct a reply. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't invite me to the funeral arrangements. He didn't even give me a chance to offer him a shred of emotional comfort. He had effectively cut me out of the most pivotal moment of his life. That entire week, our suburban house felt less like a home and more like an abandoned museum. I went to work every morning, executed my forensic audits with mechanical precision, and returned home to a silent, dark structure that felt increasingly alien. My friends and colleagues at the accounting firm began to notice the severe physical toll the isolation was taking on me. I was losing weight, my skin was pale, and the dark circles under my eyes were becoming impossible to conceal with makeup. Maya, my closest friend at the firm and a veteran forensic accountant who had seen me through every major milestone of my adult life, finally cornered me in the quiet corner of the office break room on Thursday afternoon. She slid a fresh, steaming cup of dark roast coffee across the table and sat down directly opposite me, her sharp, analytical eyes scanning my face with deep maternal concern. "Clara, you look like a literal ghost walking through these hallways," Maya said, her voice dropping to a low, protective whisper. "You haven't been present in a single meeting this week, and you're making tiny entry errors on basic ledgers. That is completely unlike you. Is this still about Leo's grandfather? Is the estate process causing this much strain?" "He's completely changed, Maya," I confessed, my voice cracking slightly as I stared down into the dark, reflective surface of the coffee. "Ever since the inheritance became a statistical reality, it's like the compassionate, humble man I spent 7 years building a life with has completely vanished into thin air. He looks at me like I'm a line item expense he's planning to cut from the corporate budget. He hasn't been home in days, he won't let me near the estate, and he treats me like an intrusive stranger." Maya's brow furrowed, her sharp professional instincts instantly overriding her sympathy. She leaned forward, tapping her fingernail against the wooden table for emphasis. "Look at me, Clara. You are quite literally the most brilliant forensic accountant I have ever worked with. When a corporate entity starts behaving erratically, when a CEO starts hiding documents and acting completely shady, what do? You don't sit around crying and hoping for the best. You follow the paper trail, you look at the raw data. Maybe it's time you stop acting like a worried, submissive wife and start acting like the elite auditor you are. Look into his books, Clara. If he's hiding a new reality, he's left tracks. He always does. Her words hit me like a bucket of ice water, shocking my system out of its emotional paralysis. Maya was absolutely right. I had spent months playing the part of the understanding, grieving wife, allowing Leo to gaslight my intuition and minimize my intelligence. I was letting my heartbreak blind me to the reality of my own professional training. In the world of finance, behavior always manifests in the ledger. If Leo was shifting his reality, there would be a mathematical footprint. That night, the storm inside my head matched the gathering clouds outside. I sat down at my personal desktop computer in our home office. Because I had personally set up Leo's independent architectural design firm, established his corporate banking portals, and managed every single cent of our household and business finances for the last 7 years, I still possessed master administrative access to our shared cloud storage, his corporate bank accounts, and his company's financial database. Out of pure, unadulterated trust, I hadn't logged into his business accounts in over 6 months, choosing to let him handle his own commercial growth. But the moment I logged into his corporate banking portal that evening, my jaw dropped and the breath was completely sucked out of my lungs. Over the course of the last 3 months, Leo's boutique architectural business account had received multiple massive consecutive wire transfers totaling a staggering $485,000. The sender of these massive funds wasn't Arthur Vance's personal checking account, and it wasn't a standard commercial client paying an invoice. The originating entity was a private shell corporation registered in the state of Delaware under the name Vance and Evans Holdings, LLC. My eyes narrowed into a razor-sharp focus as my forensic training completely took over. Evans. Like Victoria Evans, the high-powered estate attorney Leo claimed was an eccentric, older Southern woman who sent harmless late-night texts. I immediately pulled up my premium corporate registry databases, utilizing my professional credentials to bypass standard public firewalls. Within 45 minutes of deep digital tracking, I managed to unearth the original formation documents, the banking routing numbers, and the registered legal representative for Vance and Evans Holdings, LLC. It wasn't an older, sophisticated female attorney from a legacy law firm. The sole registered agent, managing director, and primary debit card holder of that shell corporation was a 26-year-old high-end real estate model, aspiring luxury designer, and Instagram influencer named Vanessa Elks. VE. My fingers began to tremble violently against the keyboard as I pulled up Vanessa Elks' public social media profiles. What I discovered on her grid felt like a physical, brutal blow to my chest, a sensation so violent it made me physically sick to my stomach. There were dozens of high-definition photos and video clips of her posing in ultra-exclusive luxury restaurants downtown, lounging poolside at 5-star tropical resorts in Cabo, and drinking champagne on the private balconies of high-rise penthouses over the last 6 months. And in several of those carefully curated photos, although his face was always deliberately cropped out, obscured by oversized designer sunglasses, or partially hidden behind her flowing blonde hair, I recognized every single detail with terrifying clarity. I recognized the unique, bespoke, charcoal-tailored suits I had helped him pick out. I recognized the luxury watch he claimed was a business necessity. And worst of all, in a photo of 2 hands clinking crystal glasses together over a candlelit table, I saw the distinct custom silver and onyx wedding band that I had personally placed on Leo's finger 7 years ago at the city courthouse. In one particular post uploaded just 3 weeks prior, while Leo claimed he was pulling an all-night shift at his grandfather's hospice bedside, Vanessa was captured laughing on the deck of a private yacht charter. The caption she had written was a lethal injection of truth straight into my soul, counting down the exact days until my favorite brilliant architect is finally, completely free from his past. New mega mansion, new tax bracket, brand new life together, #billionaire babe, #new beginnings. I sat frozen in the pitch-black office, the harsh, unforgiving blue light of the monitor screen reflecting off the tears that were silently, continuously streaming down my cold cheeks. The puzzle pieces had clicked into place with a devastating mathematical perfection. Leo hadn't been distant because of the psychological weight of his grandfather's impending death. He wasn't stressed about the family legacy. He was actively, meticulously planning an entirely new, lavish existence with a younger, superficial woman, funded entirely by the multi-million-dollar inheritance he was about to receive. He was merely using me as a placeholder, a free financial manager to keep his business afloat until the old man drew his last breath so he could take the $50 million and run. The heartbreak was an ocean, but beneath the waves of grief, a cold, sharp, and calcified rage began to crystallize within my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't type out a furious, unhinged text message confronting him. I closed the tabs, downloaded every single byte of financial data, saved the time-stamped screenshots of Vanessa's posts, and backed them up on 3 separate encrypted flash drives. I needed to see exactly how far his depravity would go before I made my move. I needed him to show his full hand. The definitive answer to just how far Leo's depravity would go came exactly 1 week after his grandfather's passing. It was Friday evening, and the weather outside seemed to mirror the volatile destruction of my inner world. A violent, unhinged Midwestern thunderstorm was ripping through the suburbs, unleashing a torrential downpour that lashed against the windows of our home like a barrage of gravel. The wind was howling through the trees, causing the power lines outside to sway dangerously. I was sitting completely still in the center of our dark living room, the only illumination coming from the occasional blinding flashes of lightning that lit up the space. I didn't turn on the lamps. I just sat there, waiting. I knew through my professional legal channels that the formal reading of Arthur Vance's final will and testament had taken place downtown at 10 a.m. that morning. Around 8 p.m., the heavy front door was violently thrown open, banging loudly against the drywall. Leo walked in. He wasn't drenched by the storm. He was wearing a pristine, untouched $1,000 camel cashmere overcoat, stepping over our threshold like a conquering emperor. His facial expression wasn't one of grief, solemnity, or even the manic anxiety he had displayed the week before. It was an expression of absolute, unchallenged, terrifying dominance. He looked around our home with a sneer as if he were a king inspecting a dirty peasant's hovel. But he didn't come alone. Stepping into the foyer right behind him was Vanessa Elks. She was even more striking in person, her long blonde hair perfectly blown out, completely unfazed by the humidity outside. She was dressed in head-to-toe designer labels, dripping in gold jewelry, and clutching a brand-new crocodile skin handbag. She looked around our living room, her eyes landing on our family photos, our modest furniture, and our cozy decor, with a look of intense, mocking amusement. "Leo?" I stood up from the armchair, my voice incredibly steady, flat, and devoid of emotion despite the massive surge of adrenaline roaring through my veins like wildfire. "What exactly is going on here, and who is this woman in our house?" Leo didn't bother answering me right away. He walked over to the marble kitchen island with a slow, deliberate swagger. He opened his genuine leather briefcase, pulled out a thick, bound legal document with a gold-embossed seal, and slapped it down onto the counter with a heavy, echoey thud. "It's official, Clara," Leo said, his voice entirely hollow, stripped of any warmth or humanity. "The inheritance officially cleared the probate court today. $50 million. The entire principal has been moved into my private, newly structured corporate accounts. I am officially untouchable." "Congratulations," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air like a razor blade. "You got your money. Now answer my question. Why is she standing in my home?" Vanessa let out a sharp, condescending chuckle, stepping further into the room and running a long, manicured acrylic fingernail along the fabric of my favorite armchair. "Oh, honey, let's get one thing straight. This isn't your home anymore. Honestly, Leo, you really weren't exaggerating. This place is incredibly depressing. The energy in here is just so painfully middle class. I can smell the budget detergent from here." Leo smirked, walking over to Vanessa and wrapping his arm tightly around her waist right in front of my face, pulling her flushed body against his cashmere coat. "Clara, let's not make a pathetic, dramatic scene out of this. It's over. Our marriage has been functionally dead for a very long time. Let's be totally real for a second. You were a fantastic support system when I was a nobody struggling to pay for drafting paper. I appreciate that. I really do. But you simply do not belong in my new world. You're a basic, simple, boring accountant. I am a multi-millionaire mogul now. We move in completely different social and economic circles, And frankly, you're an embarrassment to the brand I'm building." I stood there, staring at him, genuinely stunned by the sheer, unadulterated sociopathy radiating from the man I had loved for 7 years. "You're divorcing me? Just like that? After every single sacrifice I made to build your business from the dirt?" "I've already had my new legal team draw up the paperwork," Leo said casually, tossing a second white paper packet next to the gold-embossed will. "It's a standard, irreconcilable differences filing. You'll get a small, pity settlement, maybe 50 grand if you sign the documents quietly and don't make a fuss. But let me warn you right now, if you try to fight me in court or go after a single cent of the inheritance, you will end up completely bankrupt. Inheritance isn't considered marital property in this jurisdiction, Clara. My grandfather's 50 million belongs entirely, exclusively to me. You have absolutely zero legal claim to it, so don't get greedy." "And you brought your mistress into our house tonight just to tell me this?" I whispered, my voice intentionally shaking a little to let him think I was completely broken. "I brought Vanessa because we are packing up the rest of my personal designer clothes and heading straight to the luxury penthouse we leased downtown," Leo replied coldly, his eyes turning to absolute ice. "Actually, you know what? Change of plans. Looking at you is ruining our mood. I want you out of this house tonight. The lease on this property is technically under my corporate firm's name, and as the CEO, I'm terminating your occupancy effective immediately. Vanessa wants to bring her celebrity interior decorator in here tomorrow morning at 9 to look at the bones of this place before we put it on the market. I don't want you cluttering up the aesthetic." "Tonight!" I gestured wildly toward the pitch-black windows, where a massive flash of lightning illuminated the torrential downpour. "Leo, there is a literal flash flood warning and a severe thunderstorm outside. Where am I supposed to go at 9 o'clock on a Friday night?" "I don't give a damn, Clara," Leo said, his voice dropping into a harsh, venomous hiss. "Go to a cheap motel. Go sleep on Maya's couch. Go check into a shelter for all I care. But your pathetic, crying presence here is completely ruining our celebration. Pack your bags, right now, or I'll call the police and have you dragged out for trespassing on corporate property." When I stood my ground, refusing to move my feet because I was cataloging every single word for my future legal strategy, Leo didn't hesitate. He marched into the master closet, grabbed my 2 largest suitcases, and threw them violently onto the hardwood floor. He began ripping my clothes out of the dresser drawers, grabbing handfuls of my sweaters, dresses, and intimate apparel and shoving them into the bags in a disorganized, chaotic mess. Vanessa stood leaning against the bedroom doorframe, holding her iPhone up, recording the entire humiliating spectacle for her social media close friends list, giggling like a cruel schoolgirl as my life was dismantled. Within 15 minutes, Leo dragged my heavy, overstuffed suitcases down the hallway and threw them into the open foyer. He unlocked the heavy front door, allowing the freezing, violent wind and sheets of rain to sweep across the hardwood floors. "Have a nice, ordinary life, Clara," Leo sneered, a twisted, victorious grin spreading across his face. With a brutal, heavy shove against my shoulder, he pushed me out of the foyer and onto the wet concrete of the front porch. Before I could even regain my balance, he grabbed my suitcases and flung them past me, watching them roll into the muddy driveway, the zippers bursting slightly under the impact. The heavy oak door slammed shut in my face with a deafening boom, and I heard the unmistakable mechanical click of the heavy deadbolt locking me out of my own life. I stood there on the porch for a moment, completely paralyzed before walking down into the downpour. Within 3 seconds, I was entirely soaked to the bone, my hair plastered to my face, the freezing rain mixing with the hot, angry tears streaming down my cheeks. I looked at my clothes scattered in the mud. I looked up at the glowing, brightly lit windows of the house, where I could clearly see Leo and Vanessa popping the cork off a bottle of expensive champagne, laughing and clinking their glasses together through the sheer curtains. They truly believed they had won. They thought they had utterly crushed a helpless, dependent little wife. But as I climbed into the driver's seat of my car, shivering violently with the heater blasting at maximum capacity, a profound psychological shift occurred. The sadness completely vanished. The heartbreak evaporated. In their place came a crystalline, hyper-focused, and lethal clarity. I wiped the water from my eyes, placed my hands firmly on the steering wheel, and let out a long, slow, calculation-filled breath. Leo thought he was an absolute expert in law and finance simply because fortune had dropped a bag of money into his lap. But in his blinding arrogance, he had completely forgotten one critical, fatal detail. I am a master forensic accountant, and in his haste to humiliate me, he had left the gold-embossed copy of Arthur Vance's final will and testament sitting right on the kitchen counter, completely forgetting that he had also stuffed a carbon copy of the full estate trust disclosure right into the side pocket of my burst suitcase. I didn't drive to a motel, and I didn't head to Maya's house to cry on her shoulder. Instead, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of freezing rain, adrenaline, and absolute clarity, I drove straight to my firm's corporate headquarters downtown. Because I was a senior auditor with master keycard access, I slipped into the silent, shadow-drenched skyscraper at midnight. I bypassed the endless rows of empty cubicles, walked into my private office, and locked the heavy glass door behind me. I stripped off my soaked jacket, pulled the gold-embossed copy of Arthur Vance's final will and testament from my bag, and laid it out under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of my desk. I spent the next 48 hours straight in that room. I didn't sleep. I barely blinked. My world was reduced to black ink, legal citations, and financial ledgers, fueled entirely by stale black coffee and a righteous, burning fury. I analyzed every single line, every hidden subclause, every vague footnote, and every complex financial addendum across all 90 pages of that dense document. Leo's high-priced downtown lawyers had done an incredible job trying to bury the true operational structure of the trust fund, assuming no one would ever look close enough to challenge it. But they didn't account for a master forensic accountant auditing it line by line with the precision of a surgeon. And then, at exactly 3:14 a.m. on Sunday morning, I found it. The Holy Grail. The ultimate catastrophic undoing of Leo Vance. Arthur Vance had been a notorious control freak in life, and it turned out he was an even bigger control freak in death. He didn't trust Leo, not for a single second. The old man knew his grandson was inherently arrogant, impulsive, short-sighted, and easily manipulated by superficial, shiny things. To protect his life's work from being squandered by an idiot, Arthur had inserted a highly specific, airtight, ironclad conditional clause deep within Article 4, Section 2 of the Master Trust Agreement. The clause explicitly stated that the $50 million inheritance was entirely unconditionally contingent upon the primary heir maintaining a stable, traditional, and continuous family structure. Arthur firmly believed that a man who couldn't maintain the stability and integrity of his own marriage was fundamentally unfit to manage a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate empire. The legal text read exactly as follows. Should the designated primary heir, Leo Vance, initiate formal divorce proceedings, dissolve his legal marriage, or engage in contractually proven marital infidelity within a strict period of 24 months following the testator's passing, the entire principal of the Vance Trust shall be immediately and permanently forfeited by said heir. In such an event, to prevent the fragmentation or dissolution of the estate's capital, the absolute control, ownership, and executive title of the trust shall be transferred in its entirety to the heir's legal spouse at the time of the testator's death, provided she has remained faithful and actively supportive during the foundational years of the heir's professional career. My breath hitched in my throat as I read the paragraph over and over again, a wild, disbelieving laugh bubbling up in my chest. Arthur Vance hadn't written this clause out of the goodness of his heart to protect me. He had built it as a psychological leash to control Leo from beyond the grave. He wanted to force Leo to remain a stable, respectable family man, but Leo, in his blind, suffocating greed and overwhelming hubris, hadn't even bothered to read the fine print of the final execution documents. He had just stared at the $50 million figure on the summary page, assumed his legal team had taken care of everything, and immediately moved to throw me out of his life so he could flaunt his new wealth with his mistress. And the absolute best part? Because Leo had already officially filled out and submitted the divorce paperwork through his lawyers on Friday afternoon, which I instantly confirmed by pulling up the public electronic court docket on my monitor. He had already officially triggered the forfeiture mechanism. He had legally signed away his entire inheritance before the first week of his new billionaire life was even over. Furthermore, thanks to my digital digging into Vanessa's public social media and Leo's corporate banking portal, I possessed an unassailable mountain of time-stamped, geotagged evidence documenting his extensive marital infidelity over the past 6 months. He had literally funded his own trap using his business accounts. I didn't call Leo. I didn't send him a single warning text. I spent all of Monday and Tuesday working quietly, behind closed doors, with the executive board of the Vance Estate Trust and the true senior founding partners of the legacy law firm handling Arthur's empire. When I walked into their high-rise boardroom and presented them with a certified court copy of Leo's active divorce filing, the forensic audit of the Shell Corporation transfers, and the binder of time-stamped evidence of his cheating, the trustees sat in absolute stunned silence. The head trustee, an elderly, sharp-eyed billionaire named Corporate Counselor Sterling, adjusted his spectacles, looking over my impeccably organized data with a mixture of awe and sheer disbelief. "This is an absolute legal and financial catastrophe for Leo," Sterling remarked, tapping the papers on the mahogany table. "He has explicitly, recklessly violated the core conditional terms of his grandfather's estate. Mrs. Vance, your husband has functionally disinherited himself. As of this afternoon, we are executing an emergency freeze on all accounts currently under his name. The formal legal process of transferring the full $50 million asset portfolio into your exclusive control has officially begun." I smiled politely, closing my laptop. "Thank you, gentlemen. Please ensure that the official notification of this transfer is delivered to him in a highly public, undeniable manner." The stage was set. The trap was about to snap shut, and Leo had absolutely no idea that the quiet accountant he had thrown into the rain was about to strip him of every single thing he loved. Exactly 7 days after Leo threw me out into the pouring rain like a piece of worthless garbage, the heavy hammer of absolute karma came swinging down with a cold, merciless, and terrifyingly mathematical precision. It was a beautiful, crisp Friday afternoon, the kind of picture-perfect Midwestern day that makes you feel like anything is possible. Leo, in his infinite arrogance, decided that a private celebration wasn't enough. He needed the entire city of Chicago to witness his grand ascension into the ranks of the elite. He had rented out the entire rooftop terrace of the Obsidian, an ultra-exclusive, insanely expensive high-rise restaurant downtown that overlooked the glittering expanse of Lake Michigan. He called the event his Inheritance Celebration and Architectural Brand Relaunch Party. He hadn't just invited his friends, he had used his temporary trust funds to hire a high-end PR firm to pack the venue. The guest list was a calculated mix of prominent city officials, wealthy potential commercial real estate developers, local lifestyle journalists, and a handful of high-profile influencers. Leo wanted to ensure that his new billionaire status was officially cemented in the social fabric of the city. Thanks to the private investigator I had retained using a small retainer from my own personal savings account, I had a front-row digital seat to the entire setup. My investigator was embedded inside the catering staff, quietly feeding me real-time updates. Vanessa Elks was there, looking like the epitome of a trophy wife. She was wearing a stunning, custom-tailored white silk designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, dripping in diamonds that Leo had prematurely charged to his corporate account earlier that week. The two of them were standing in front of a massive, customized media wall, flashing brilliant, artificial smiles for a swarm of photographers. Leo looked like he was on top of the world. He was holding a glass of vintage champagne, laughing loudly, and slapping wealthy developers on the back. I knew exactly what time the hammer was scheduled to drop. I had coordinated the entire execution with the court process servers and a private security detail to ensure there would be absolutely no delays, no excuses, and maximum visibility. Right around 4:30 p.m., just as the afternoon sun was hitting the glass skyscrapers perfectly, the party reached its absolute peak. Leo walked up onto a small, beautifully decorated stage at the front of the rooftop terrace. He tapped a crystal glass with a silver spoon, grabbed a wireless microphone, and cleared his throat. The crowd of 100 elite guests slowly fell silent, turning their attention toward the stage. "Thank you all for being here today," Leo said, his voice booming through the high-end sound system, dripping with a smooth, insufferable self-importance. "Today marks the beginning of a new era. For years, my architectural vision was confined by, let's call it limited resources, but today, backed by the full weight of the legacy left behind by my grandfather, Arthur Vance, my firm is expanding into mega commercial development. We are talking about $50 million of pure capital injection into the skyline of this city. I want to thank my beautiful partner, Vanessa, for showing me what a truly elevated life looks like And, before he could even finish his sentence, the heavy double-glass doors leading out onto the rooftop terrace were violently pushed open. The security guards at the door didn't even try to stop them. Walking down the center aisle of the rooftop terrace, cutting right through the crowd of wealthy guests like a hot knife through butter, were two stone-faced, sharply dressed court process servers. They were flanked on either side by two uniformed off-duty police officers I had legally contracted to ensure the peace was kept. The chatter in the room evaporated instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the rooftop, punctuated only by the wind whipping off the lake. Leo lowered the microphone slightly, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson as he stared at the intruders. "What the hell is the meaning of this?" Leo barked into the microphone, his voice echoing awkwardly across the terrace. "This is an entirely private, high-profile corporate event. Security, get these people out of here immediately. They are trespassing." The lead process server, a tall man with a booming, unbothered voice, stopped right at the base of the stage. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a massive, thick legal binder bounded by a heavy blue corporate seal. "Leo Vance?" the server asked loudly, making sure his voice carried across the silent crowd. "Yes, I'm Leo Vance, and you're ruining a multi-million-dollar launch party," Leo screamed, stepping down from the stage, his hands clenching into tight fists. "You are being officially served," the server announced calmly, thrusting the thick blue binder directly into Leo's chest. "This is an emergency executive injunction and an immediate asset freeze directive issued directly by the Board of Trustees of the Vance Estate Trust in conjunction with the Cook County Family Court. As of exactly 30 minutes ago, your legal access to all inheritance funds, trust accounts, corporate checking lines, and estate property holdings has been permanently terminated due to a material catastrophic breach of the conditional clauses outlined in Article 4, Section 2 of your grandfather's final will." A collective, deafening gasp rippled through the crowd of elite guests. People immediately began nudging each other, whispering frantically. Leo let out a forced, hysterical laugh, though I could see from the investigator's live video feed that his eyes were darting around the terrace in absolute, unadulterated panic. "This is a joke. This is a pathetic administrative mistake. My grandfather left everything to me. I am the sole biological heir to the Vance fortune. Do you know who my lawyers are?" "There is no mistake, Mr. Vance," the server replied, his voice chillingly professional. "By filing formal divorce paperwork against your legal spouse, Clara Vance, on Friday afternoon, and due to extensive legally verified and time-stamped evidence of prolonged marital infidelity, you have officially and irrevocably triggered the immediate forfeiture mechanism of the trust. As per the explicit, ironclad instructions of the testator, Arthur Vance, you have functionally disinherited yourself. Full legal ownership, corporate title, and executive control of the $50 million Vance Trust have been transferred exclusively in their entirety to your wife, Clara Vance." Vanessa's jaw dropped so low it looked like it was going to physically unhinge from her face. She took a sharp step back from Leo, her eyes wide with horror as she looked at the legal document. "What? Leo, what the hell is this guy talking about? What do you mean the money is gone? Tell me this is a prank." "It's a lie! It's a setup!" Leo screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched shriek as he violently ripped open the blue binder. His manicured fingers frantically tore through the pages, landing directly on the highlighted legal text of Article 4. As his eyes scanned the text, watching the absolute reality of his destruction laid out in cold, unyielding black ink, every single drop of color drained from his face. He went completely gray. His hands began to shake so violently that the wireless microphone slipped from his slick, sweaty palm, hitting the wooden deck floor with a loud, deafening screech of audio feedback that made half the crowd cover their ears. But the humiliation wasn't even close to finished. At that exact, calculated second, the massive, state-of-the-art digital screens behind the stage, which were originally programmed to display a flashy, rotating promotional video of Leo's architectural drawings, suddenly flickered, glitched, and changed. I had given the tech team at the restaurant a direct authorization order via the Trust's legal counsel an hour prior. Instead of his mediocre architectural designs, the giant screens displayed a crisp, high-definition official legal notice from the Trust's depository bank, alongside a massive, bold, and unmissable message that was flashed for everyone to see. Vance Estate Trust, under new management, sole executive trustee and owner, Clara Vance, All incoming and outgoing capital portfolios successfully transferred. The destruction of his ego was total, absolute, and utterly public. Within a matter of seconds, the local journalists and lifestyle bloggers in the crowd pulled out their phones, frantically snapping photos and recording video clips of Leo's broken, terrified, and sweat-drenched face as he stood frozen under the giant text. The very people he had invited to witness his glory were now live tweeting his historic downfall to the entire city. Potential commercial clients immediately began backing away from him, shaking their heads in disgust and leaving their drinks on the tables. Vanessa looked at him like he was a rotting corpse. She didn't offer a single word of comfort. She stepped away from him on the stage so fast she nearly snapped the heel off her designer shoe, grabbed her crocodile handbag from the VIP table, and ran toward the elevators without looking back at him even once. Leo stood entirely alone on that stage, clutching the blue binder to his chest like a life jacket, watching his entire billionaire reality turn into absolute dust before the sun had even finished setting. By Friday evening, Leo's entire manufactured reality had completely, catastrophically collapsed into ash. The sleek luxury sports car he had proudly leased using the Trust's corporate checking line had been repossessed by a flatbed tow truck directly from the Obsidian's valet parking lot while the remaining guests watched in amusement. The multi-million-dollar downtown penthouse he had booked with Vanessa was locked down by a team of estate lawyers within the hour, his custom digital access codes wiped from the master system. He was ruined, completely broke, and publicly exposed to the entire city of Chicago as a premier fraud. Which brings us back to exactly 7 days after he threw me out into the rain. I was staying in the presidential suite of a gorgeous, ultra-luxury boutique hotel downtown, booked entirely under my newly consolidated corporate account, when my phone began violently vibrating against the marble desk. 42 missed calls, a relentless deluge of frantic, unhinged, and borderline illiterate text messages, all of them from Leo. Around 9 p.m., a heavy, desperate knock rattled the thick wooden door of my suite. I nodded quietly to the large private security guard I had stationed inside the foyer. He cracked the door open just wide enough for me to see who was standing in the hallway. It was Leo. He looked absolutely, utterly unrecognizable. The pristine $1,000 camel cashmere coat was deeply wrinkled, stained with mud, and drenched at the hem. His hair was a wild, disheveled, sweat-matted mess, and his eyes were bloodshot and heavily swollen from hours of frantic crying. He looked exactly like the desperate, broken man he had been when I first met him in that drafty, freezing studio apartment, except this time, there was absolutely no innocence or artistic passion left in his eyes. There was only the raw, terrifying panic of a cornered animal. The very second the security guard opened the door fully, Leo didn't even try to stand. He collapsed straight onto his knees right there on the carpeted doorstep, sobbing hysterically, his hands clasped together in a pathetic gesture of prayer. "Clara, please, please God, you have to help me," Leo begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate shriek that echoed down the quiet hallway. "It was all a massive mistake. I was out of my mind, Clara. The pressure of my grandfather's death, the lawyers, the money, it drove me literally insane. I didn't mean a single word I said to you last Friday. I swear to you I didn't." I looked down at him from the center of the elegant foyer, my arms crossed, my expression completely, chillingly neutral. I felt absolutely no surge of anger, no burning hatred, and most importantly, not a single drop of pity. "Get up off the floor, Leo. You look entirely pathetic." "I'll do anything you want, Clara. Anything," he wept, literally crawling forward a few inches to grab at the hem of my tailored trousers. "We can tear up the divorce papers. I'll fire my legal team. We can start completely over. We've been together for 7 years, Clara. You know me better than anyone. You know the real me. I love you. I've always loved you. Vanessa means absolutely nothing to me. She already packed her bags, emptied my emergency safe, and blocked my number the exact second she realized the trust was frozen. She was just a parasite using me. Please, Clara, don't do this to me. Don't take everything away from me." "I didn't take a single thing away from you, Leo," I said softly, my voice completely flat, channeling the cold objectivity of a final audit report. "You did this entirely to yourself. You signed the divorce papers. You chose to violate the explicit terms of your grandfather's trust. You chose to push me out into a flash flood to impress a mistress. You built your own financial trap, and you walked right into it with a smile on your face. Please, Clara, he sobbed, looking up at me with pleading, desperate eyes. Just give me one more chance. We can share the 50 million. We can build the architectural firm together. You can manage the corporate books just like the old times. If you don't help me, I have absolutely nothing left. I already signed hundreds of thousands of dollars in personal guarantees for business loans and luxury leases this week that I can't pay back. I'll go to federal prison for corporate fraud, Clara. I knelt down slightly, getting close enough to look him directly in his bloodshot eyes, letting him feel the absolute coldness radiating from my face. You're exactly right, Leo. You do have nothing, and that is precisely what you deserve. I stood back up, not breaking eye contact as I signaled to the security guard. Remove him from the floor, please. If he steps foot on this property again, file an immediate emergency restraining order. The guard grabbed Leo firmly by the arms, effortlessly hoisting his trembling body off his knees as Leo began to scream and beg, his voice echoing frantically down the long corridor until the heavy suite doors shut with a solid, definitive click, cutting off his pathetic cries for good. I walked back into the main living space of the suite, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering, beautiful lights of the Chicago skyline. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the mahogany desk, and opened my laptop. I had a $50 million commercial real estate portfolio to restructure, and I needed to ensure every single asset was correctly allocated. But as I logged into the Master Trust database to begin my official management overhaul, I noticed a final encrypted digital addendum that had just been automatically uploaded by the estate's primary legal vault, a document that had been strictly sealed until Leo's official forfeiture paperwork was finalized by the courts. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as I opened the secure PDF file. It was a private, deeply personal letter written by Arthur Vance himself, dated exactly 1 week before his final stroke. As my eyes scanned the typed words, an icy chill ran down my spine, followed instantly by a slow, shocking, and deeply satisfied smile that spread across my face. The letter read exactly as follows. To the executive trustees of the Vance estate, if you are reading this document, it means my grandson Leo has done exactly what I predicted he would do from the very moment I brought him into my home. He has proven himself to be a greedy, short-sighted, arrogant fool who values superficial status and cheap flattery over foundational loyalty. He has triggered the forfeiture clause, and he has lost the fortune. But there is a final, fundamental truth that must be recorded in the legal history of this family. I did not design the Article 4 marital clause to control Leo. I designed it because I have been quietly monitoring Clara's professional work in the financial sector for years. I hired a private intelligence firm to audit Leo's boutique business months ago, and I discovered that the only reason his company survived its first 3 years was because of Clara's brilliant, relentless financial engineering. Leo is a thoroughly mediocre architect, but Clara is an absolute financial genius. I never cared about passing my life's work down to Leo. He happens to share my blood, but he does not possess my mind. Clara does. This entire inheritance structure was never a trap designed to save Leo. It was a filter, a test to see if he was stupid enough to throw away the most valuable, brilliant asset he ever had in his life. I knew he would fail, and I knew Clara would win. Clara, if you are reading this, the $50 million was always intended for you. Use it to build an empire that actually deserves your mind. Arthur Vance hadn't been manipulated by Leo for a single second. The old tycoon had engineered the entire brilliant scenario from the very beginning. He knew his grandson's shallow character perfectly, and he had used Leo's own blinding arrogance as a filter to deliver his life's work directly into the hands of the only person truly capable of running it, me. Leo thought he was playing a high-stakes game of chess against a weak, defenseless wife. He thought his sudden wealth made him an untouchable king, but he didn't realize he was just a disposable pawn in a much larger generational game, a game brilliantly engineered by his billionaire grandfather and won by the forensic accountant he thought he could throw out into the rain. Today, Leo is living out a miserable reality in a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the rough side of town. It looks remarkably similar to the drafty place where I first met him, only this time, there is no love or ambition to keep the room warm. He's working a low-paying, entry-level drafting job just to pay off the massive, suffocating wave of personal debts and broken leases from his ruined business. Vanessa Elks completely blocked his number and wiped him from her social media accounts within the exact hour his trust access vanished. She didn't look back once. As for me, I officially moved my things into the massive executive suite of the Vance Corporation headquarters downtown. I am no longer just a junior auditor looking into other people's wealth or managing the chaotic books of a husband who didn't appreciate me. I am running the entire empire, and every single time it rains over the Chicago skyline, I stop what I'm doing. I walk over to my floor-to-ceiling high-rise window, take a slow, quiet sip of my coffee, and smile. I look down at the tiny cars crawling through the streets below, and I remind myself of the absolute most important rule in accounting. Always, always audit the fine print. Because you never know when a numbers girl is going to end up with the whole damn kingdom.